In the last section, we talked about interfaces and how they are essentially just containers or wrappers around some behavior that we want to convert into or treat as an object. Okay? So we're now going to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that is called inheritance. So consider the following problem. We have a class called employee, and let's say that it has or employees have a name and they have an age. Okay, so very straightforward. We want to add another field. We want to add a field, let's say hourly pay. So how can we do this? Well, I mean, we could just say, like, we could just mutate this field directly and, do something, or just add a field directly, like private int salary, and then add this to the constructor, and then add it as a parameter, or assign it over to the instance variable, have a getter and a setter for it. We don't have setters here, but that's fine. And then we'd be good, right? Well, there's two issues with that. The first is that now we've introduced this fact that employees have, or not salary, sorry, I'm thinking of two things at once. That should have been hourly pay, but you get the idea. It introduces this coupling that now employees have to receive an hourly wage. So the reason why that's bad is because any code that existed before the change now doesn't work, because we now have a constructor that receives an hourly wage and not just a name and an age. So, you may think, okay, well, why don't we just, overload the constructor by having one that receives the name, age, and hourly wage. So we could do something like this: dot hourly wage equals hourly wage. And then we can just call the other constructor by passing the name, the age, and then maybe -1 to indicate that this employee does not have an hourly wage. So you could do that. You could do that only if you had access to this class. So a lot of times you're going to be working with classes, at least in the real world, that you don't have direct access to, or that you can't change willy-nilly like this. So what do? The solution is something called inheritance. So what we can do, let's go back to what we had before. So what we can do is we can say that there's a subclass of employee called hourly employee that inherits from or extends employee. Okay? It extends employee. And what that does is it will bring down all methods in the employee class and bring them down to the hourly employee class, as long as they're not private. So what does this mean? This also means that an hourly employee is a employee, or is an employee. Okay? This relationship, as the name sort of implies, is called an is-a relationship, because it's saying that a subclass is a kind of the superclass. So, and just for terminology's sake, a subclass B extends a superclass A. Okay? So, you might have like class B extends A. So here, B is the subclass, A is the superclass. Okay? So there's another note that I should say, and that is the fact that all classes implicitly extend the object class. So we've been sort of saying that, everything in Java, everything is an object. Now, we've been kind of throwing that term out willy-nilly, but now we really understand what this means. It's the fact that everything is an object, everything is a object because everything implicitly extends object. Okay, so we have a class called A extends. Well, it wouldn't extend object unless you it wouldn't explicitly extend object unless you told it to, which you should never do. But if you have a class called B extends A, then that means that B is an A, and A is an object. Therefore, B is an object. Okay, so it's a transitive sort of relationship. Okay, but the reverse is not true. Not all objects are A's, and not all objects are B's, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's see what that looks like in practice. So we have this employee class, and we want to extend it by saying we have a class called hourly employee, and it will extend the employee superclass. Now, what do we have to do from here? What we should do is, well, the first thing we shouldn't do is copy everything in here and paste it in here. That would be, to put it bluntly, not very smart, because this is repeating duplicate information. Okay? An hourly employee already does technically have access to this information through the superclass. But, what we want to do is say that the things that are unique to an hourly employee include the following. An hourly employee has an hourly rate. So I'm going to say hourly rate instead of age. Or instead of hourly wage to not rhyme with age. Okay? So, then an hourly employee should receive not just one thing, but it should receive three things. So, it'll receive an age, and an hourly rate. And we'll just assume that, let's make it like an actual hourly rate that might have a, there might be a dollar amount and a cents amount. So, we'll make it a double. Okay? Now, how do we, first of all, we know how to assign this to this. We can just do this dot hourly rate equals hourly rate, and we're good. But how do we tell that we want to say this, the name and the age parameter should be assigned to the instance variables in the superclass? We can't just do this dot name equals name because name has private access inside of employee. And again, you shouldn't just change this to be non-private, okay? That's not what you should do. What you can do instead is actually just call the superclass constructor. And how do you do that? Well, you can just do super name age. And what this will do is it'll pass the information up to the superclass. Okay, so it'll say, take that name and age, and then stick it in for here, and those will be assigned to the parameters. Okay, so let's also write a getter method, and I'll just have IntelliJ get it for me because I'm feeling lazy. So now let's write not some tests, but we'll declare some instances of a class. Okay, so to create an employee, we can do employee E1 equals new employee. We'll say the employee's name is Joshua and the age is 25. Okay. Now, how do we create an hourly employee? So there are two ways we can do this. Again, because hourly employees are employees, we could do something like employee E2 equals new hourly employee. We'll say the name is Lily, the age is 20, and the hourly rate is $13.50. Okay? So that's one way you could do this. And in fact, let's actually just print out the name and the age of these employees. So, what's interesting is that we can call well, actually it's not so interesting because it's declared as an employee, so this should make sense. But we can just call get name and get age, and everything should work just fine. Okay, so this should output Joshua 25 and Lily 20, and it does. Okay. But now we want to know, how can we get access to this value, this hourly rate? Well, you might think we can do sort of the same thing and say e2.getHourlyRate. But there's an issue. The issue is that we declared this object to be an employee. Therefore, we can only access the methods that are inside of the employee class. getHourlyRate is a method in the hourly employee class. So there's a couple things you could do. The first is you could do what's called, or you could just do a typecast. So hourly employee E2, and now this would treat this as an hourly employee, and just cast it down to, well, we would cast it down to an E2, and then this would be, we could now treat this as an hourly employee and get the hourly rate. Okay, and then that would work just fine. The other way is a little bit simpler. We could just declare this as an hourly employee object, and then we have access to all of the methods that are inside of the hourly employee class, but we also have access to all of the methods in the employee class. So we'll say this new employee is Gilmore, he's 26. So let's copy this down to HE, so not HE2, just HE. And notice that we can do, or we can call getName and getAge on this object, even though it's not directly an employee. Okay, but it is a subclass of employee. Okay, so now all of this should work just fine. But what's important is that if we do this right here, we have to make sure that E2 is actually an employee, or is actually an hourly employee. Or rather, it was instantiated as an hourly employee. If it wasn't, then this would throw a class cast exception, and it would not work.